Meeting number 4 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Accounts. Pursuant to Standing Order 103.3G, the committee is meeting today to study Report 5, Lessons Learned from Canada's Record on Climate Change of the Commission of the Environment and Sustainable Development Reports. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid form pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. So you are aware, the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. I would like to take this opportunity to remind all participants to this meeting that screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted. Given the ongoing pandemic situation and in light of the recommendations from health authorities, as well as the directive of the Board of Internal Economy on October 19, 2021 to remain healthy and safe, all those attending the meeting in person are to maintain 2-meter physical distancing, must wear a non-medical mask when circulating in the room, and it is highly recommended that the mask be worn at all times, including when seated. Must maintain proper hand hygiene by using the provided hand sanitizer at the room entrance. As the chair, I will be enforcing these measures for the duration of the meeting, and I thank members in advance for their cooperation. Members and witnesses may speak in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English, or French. If interpretation is lost, please inform me immediately, and we will ensure interpretation is properly restored before resuming the proceedings. The raise hand feature at the bottom of the screen can be used at any time if you wish to speak or alert the chair. For members participating in person, proceed as you usually would when the whole committee is meeting in person in a committee room. Keep in mind the Board of Internal Economy's guidelines for mask use and health protocols. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. If you are on the video conference, please click on the microphone icon to unmute yourself. Those in the room, your microphone will be controlled as normal by the Proceedings and Verification Officer. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. When you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. A reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed through the chair. With regard to a speaking list, the committee clerk and I will do the best we can to maintain consolidated order of speaking for all members, whether they are participating virtually or in person. And I would just like to, before we begin, to ask the committee if we could take the last 30 minutes today to go in camera to get drafting instructions for the report. Are we in agreement?
No, Madam Chair, I'll let Mr. Lawrence fill in. I don't think we're in agreement in proceeding to drafting instructions. We've just had an opportunity to review the report. We're going to be hearing from the witnesses today, and I think it's reasonable to provide members some time to go over the evidence and before coming in to preparing drafting instructions.
Yeah, my stated interest would be to, if at all possible, not break with public accounts tradition and have one report coming from this. So I would actually like to take some time and discuss it amongst both our party and the other parties here, because I have. Yeah, I would really hate to break with the public accounts tradition and have and not have a unanimous report. So I'd like to see if we can't offline set up the parameters so that we can make sure that we can have a unified statement coming out as we face the significant challenge of climate change.
Madam Chair.
Okay, then we will
Madam
proceed.
Chair?
Yes?
I see Ms. Shanahan's hand is up. For my part, I see Ms. Shanahan has her hand up, and I was just going to add a comment if I could.
Okay. Why don't we start with Mr. Fredgados?
Yeah, it's a very straightforward comment. I understand what my colleagues have said, but I fail to see how taking 10, 15 minutes at the end of a meeting to talk about drafting instructions is going to upend the tradition of the committee to have one report. We can talk about how exactly the report should be structured. These are just basic things that will allow analysts to do their job, so we can get on with the work. But if it's a sticking point, I guess it's a sticking point. But I'll allow Ms. Shanahan to elaborate as well.
Ms. Shanahan?
Thank you very much, Chair. And along the same lines as Mr. Fragiscato's, I'm open either way. I just want to clarify with the Chair then that we would have full rounds for everyone to ask their questions up until the expiry of the meeting, until the adjournment of the meeting. But I'm easy either way. I want to see a fulsome report and certainly a unanimous report.
Okay, thank you. I think that perhaps we don't have an agreement right now, and I'm just going to defer to the clerk.
If there's no agreement, you can move on to the witnesses, Madam Chair.
Okay. Let's move on to the witnesses. I would now like to welcome our witnesses from the Office of the Auditor General, Jerry versus DeMarco, Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development, Kimberly Leach, Principal, and Elsa DaCosta, Director, and from Equiterre, Colleen Thorpe, Executive Director, and Marc-Andre Val, Director, Government Relations. We'll start with the Commissioner of Environment and Sustainable Development. Commissioner, you have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. Please go ahead.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. We're happy to appear before your committee this morning. I'd like to acknowledge that this hearing is taking place on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. With me today are Kim Leach and Elsa DaCosta, the Principal and Director who were responsible for the report. As you know, the Office of the Auditor General of Canada conducts performance and financial audits of the federal and territorial governments. We provide elected officials with objective, fact-based information with expert advice. We also undertake special examinations of Crown corporations, and we conduct additional work, such as a yearly commentary on our financial audit work and the climate report that I will be discussing today. The Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development, who is appointed by the Auditor General, reports to Parliament at least once a year on environmental and sustainable development issues, including the specific matters set out in legislation such as the new Canadian Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act. Our most recent reports, which were tabled in Parliament in November 2021, included a report on the lessons learned from Canada's record on climate change. By choosing this topic to discuss today, the committee is sending a critical message about the urgency of addressing climate change. In preparing our report on lessons learned, we looked back at our audit work on Canada's action over the last 3 decades. We also called on climate experts and former senior government officials what we can learn from the past in order to help translate today's good intentions into real results. After over 30 years, the trend in Canada's greenhouse gas emissions which create harmful climate impacts, is going in the wrong direction. Despite repeated government commitments to decrease emissions, they have increased substantially, unlike other G7 countries. During that time, Canadians have felt the devastating effects of climate change, such as droughts, floods, melting permafrost, heat waves, wildfires and storms.
8 lessons learned from Canada's action and inaction on the enduring climate crisis. Leadership is the first lesson. Stronger leadership and coordination are needed to drive progress on climate change. Other lessons include reducing dependence on high emission industries, learning to adapt to climate change impacts, investing in a climate resilient future, increasing public awareness, acting on and not just speaking about climate targets, involving all climate solution actors, and protecting the interests of future generations. The new net zero legislation seeks to bring more rigor to Canada's approach to greenhouse gas emission reductions. Just as this committee holds government to account on financial matters and program implementation, you can also consider holding government to account on its climate plans. Ensuring that government starts translating its plans and targets into effective action would be in keeping with lesson 6 of our report. Climate change is not just an environmental issue. Its social and economic implications are just as significant. The enduring crisis of climate change looms larger than ever. Like pandemics, climate change is a global crisis, one about which experts have been raising the alarm for decades. Pandemics and climate change both carry risks to human health and the economy, and both require whole of society responses to protect present and future generations. Such as this one, our report provides critical questions that legislatures and others can consider to prompt action against commitments. We've provided these in an appendix to this statement for your reference. In closing, there is a need for the federal government to achieve real outcomes, not just words on paper or unfulfilled promises. All too often, Canada's environmental and sustainable development commitments are not met with the actions needed to protect air, land, water, and wildlife, now and for future generations. And this is a trend we urgently need to reverse. Madam Chair, this concludes my opening. Committee may have.
Thank you, Commissioner. I will now call on the witnesses from Équiterre.
Monsieur le Président,
Madam Chairperson, members of the Public Accounts Committee, thank you for having us here today. My name is Colleen Thorpe and I'm the Executive Director of Équiterre, which is an environmental NGO with over 150,000 members and supporters. We're active in the areas of agriculture, light and heavy transportation, consumer consumption, and energy and climate change in general. And I'll be sharing my time with my colleague Marc-André Viaud. On November 25th, the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development presented his report on lessons learned from Canada's performance on climate change. It concludes that Canada has gone from being a leader in the fight against climate change to lagging behind other developed climate change countries, and despite recent efforts. This is a finding that surprised no one. Our GHG emissions are increasing because we continue to mine oil and gas resources as if there were no climate crisis. I'd like to present 2 solutions in response to the issues raised in Lesson 1 and 5 of the report. First, we propose the training of the entire public service on the climate crisis and the collapse of biodiversity. We believe that the starting point for government action, coherent action on climate change, is a common understanding of the urgency and an understanding of the situation in general. In this way, public servants will be empowered to contribute their expertise to this war, quote unquote. I'd remind you that the International Panel on Climate Change warned in 2018 that limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius would require rapid, very profound and unprecedented changes in all aspects and across all levels of society. Large-scale training of public officials is an approach already being used by the government to meet its commitments to reconciliation. Recently, an employee of the Department of Justice told me how much she was affected by the training she received on the rights of Indigenous peoples. She remembered, for example, that when negotiating with Aboriginal peoples, it is customary to include an empty seat at the table, the seat of future generations, that is. Now, on the other hand, our recent experience with vaccination in the context of the pandemic underscores the importance of engaging the public service in order to bring about broader behavioural changes in the general public. The second solution we propose to you is this, and I quote from the Commissioner's report: internal planning cycles of governments that favour short-term thinking at the expense of long-term thinking to the detriment of long-term planning is an issue. This problem is particularly acute when it comes to deciding on the protection of natural environments. The weighting is based on the value attributed to that environment, and for the time being the calculation is based on its extraction potential and mining potential. Thus, the value of the forest is equivalent to the quantity of wood that can be extracted from it. However, we know that for Canada, with its huge territory, one of the most efficient ways to counteract climate change is maintaining natural spaces, conserving them, which is now called forest natural spaces, which today it is therefore necessary for the government to create models that calculate the value of these infrastructures by taking into account its ecosystem, for example, air quality, water filtration, climate regulation, carbon storage, and habitat maintenance. These calculations are based on well-established methodologies, and the public service will be supported by renowned experts in the development of these tools. I'll now hand the floor over to my colleague. Very quickly, I'll just conclude our presentation by bringing you to one last point, that of planning and the role of the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development and the government. It is mainly about lessons 1, 6 and 8. Basically, lesson 1 of the report tells us that all levels of government must work together, which requires collaboration, planning and coordination. Lesson 6 is interesting in that it talks about the need to set ambitious targets but also to implement them. Finally, Lesson 8 talks about the importance of long-term planning. It's not often that I come to a parliamentary committee to say this, but I have to say today that I'm optimistic. Why? Because on June 29, 2021, Bill C-12 on achieving carbon neutrality in 2025, net zero, received royal assent. We're talking about a bill on Canada's climate accountability. In short, what has been missing over the past 30 years. Specifically, the purpose of the legislation is to require the establishment of national GHG reduction targets based on the best available science and to promote available science and transparency, accountability and immediate ambitious action in meeting those targets. So the legislation requires the Minister to identify, plan and implement, and this addresses the Commissioner's concerns quite well in our opinion. Far be it from me to say that the bill is perfect. It can be improved and the Commissioner has a role to play in that. The Commissioner received a letter on January 25th, co-signed by 4 environmental organisations, including ours, regarding its role in the implementation of this Act that would ensure that the next report on the evaluation of the measures that we will read will be in 2050, will focus on the lessons from achieving net zero and not the lessons from what we did not actually do.
I'm wrapping up.
Thank you, Mr. Val.
The Act requires the Commissioner...
Let me wrap up.
Yes.
Okay. Selon la loi.
The Act requires the Commissioner to review at least once every 5 years the implementation of the measures undertaken by the Government of Canada to mitigate climate change, including initiatives to achieve carbon neutrality targets. The most recent greenhouse gas emissions target identified in the relevant assessment report. We look forward to hearing from the Commissioner on the role he'll play in the implementation of this legislation, including the frequency of reporting and what the baseline will be. As mentioned in Lesson 6, it will be important...
Now, I will
Vio,
have to wrap
c'est
it
monsieur-
up now. Thank you
Pardon,
very
c'est
much.
juste monsieur.
Sorry, my name is Mr. Vio, just to correct your pronunciation.
Pardon. Sorry.
bon.
We will now
No worries.
rounds of question, beginning with the official opposition for 6 minutes. And Mr. Lawrence, please go ahead for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, and I'm very much enjoying the new chair. I think she's doing a fabulous job, and thank you very much for our witnesses. My question will be for the commissioner. All my questions will be, and I also intend to split the last minute or so and give that to the great member of the Green Party there, Mr. Morris there. So just so everyone's aware. So just for the commissioner, I just want to read from the report. And it says, the Paris Agreement was to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 30% below 2005 levels by 2030. And under the Copenhagen Accord, it committed to reducing emissions by 17% below its 2005 level by 2020. Have these targets been achieved? If not, how far away are we?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to address that by first saying that the 2020 data are coming from Environment and Climate Change Canada very soon, so we can't definitively say what the 2020 data will say. However, looking at the trend line, it does not appear that the 2020 target will have been met. There's a 2-year lag in Canada in terms of the data on emissions. So no, the targets have not been met. We've had several targets over the years, 4 major international agreements: Rio, Kyoto, Copenhagen, and Paris. And we've had several plans over the years. The problem is in implementation, not so much in setting targets.
Thank you. So in the last 7 years, has this government achieved any of the international carbon reduction targets?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
That's absolutely zero, and that despite the impact of the carbon tax. What would be the amount of the cost of the carbon tax would have to be? Are we talking $500 a ton, $1,000 a ton to have any meaningful impact on carbon emissions, as it hasn't as of yet?
Well, so I wouldn't attribute the lack of progress to the relatively new carbon tax. The carbon levy is, in effect, and will be scaling up in increments of 15 megatons per year. It's intended to achieve behavior modification, so there won't be an immediate, you don't see a flip a switch and see a carbon levy having an immediate effect on emissions. It's more of a long-term trend. So I can't say for sure what the effect will be, and I can't say what the magic number is for the amount, because it depends on all of the other programs that the federal government implements.
Thank you very much. So just to conclude before I throw my time over to Mr. Morris, in the last 7 years, we've failed. We're actually in 2019 to have 1.1% reduction. We were supposed to have 30 or 17, depending, and we have failed to hit one single target during this government's time. Over to you, Mr. Morris.
Thank you to Philip, thank you for your opportunity to have a chance to chat this afternoon. My question is with respect to Lesson 8 in the report. I'll just draw out again the words. It's similar to what we heard from Ms. Thorpe as well. Lesson 8 from the report says that climate change is an intergenerational crisis with a rapidly closing window for action. Commissioner DeMarco, in the report, you mentioned the first time that we talked about phasing out fossil fuel subsidies was back in 1985. You also mentioned that essentially the Emission Reduction Fund is another net new fossil fuel subsidy that was introduced this past year that in fact continues on at a time when, I know in the report we don't have the specific numbers, but the IISD has shared that we know it's around $18 billion that we continue to subsidize oil and gas, as well as talk of a new tax credit, another new subsidy for oil and gas that we know we can expect in this upcoming budget. So I'm wondering if either Ms. Thorpe or Commissioner DeMarco, if you'd like to comment on the juxtaposition between what you're sharing, a rapid need to take action on the climate crisis, and the current government's intention to continue to increase fossil fuel subsidies?
So I can start and then pass it over to Ms. Thorpe. The Emissions Reduction Fund is a fossil fuel subsidy, and we have a performance audit report on that very subject that we released in November. The current government has committed to eliminating fossil fuel subsidies. The most recent commitment says it in plain terms. It no longer uses the word inefficient before that, which was the subject of quite a lot of debate over the years. But there is a current commitment to phase out fossil fuel subsidies by the government, and we'll be watching to see how well they progress on that commitment. Ms. Thorpe, do you have anything to add?
Évidemment, Équiterre partage.
Obviously, Équiterre shares the need to phase out fossil fuel subsidies and the fact that that isn't occurring and isn't occurring quickly enough. There are engagements and undertakings to be made in that regard. The focus of our remarks is to stress the importance and consistency and coherency of government action and how necessary it is to see collaboration between departments and agencies, such that it's understood that one good action cancels out another if there's not consistency.
For both those responses, and Mr. Viau as well, if you'd like to jump in, would welcome that. Do I have another 30 seconds?
Sorry, that's all the time that we have. We'll have to move on to the next 6-minute speaker, Mr. Fragiscaros.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. Very interesting report. There's a number of things that could be asked here, but I just wanted to begin by looking at what was said about COVID-19 and the emergency response and how that might apply to the crisis of climate change. In the report, it says, and I quote, the COVID-19 pandemic suggests that Canadians can draw crisis management lessons from it, and that economic recovery efforts will provide opportunities for the emergence of a stronger, more climate-resilient society. If governments at all levels, citizens, the private sector, and civil society work together. That's a profound statement, and I'm not disagreeing with it. I think there are lessons to be taken from the pandemic and applied to a range of different challenges and indeed crises, such as climate change. I just wonder if you could elaborate, and I suppose this goes to Mr. DeMarco. Wonder, sir, if you could elaborate on how exactly to do that, because what's being called for is straightforward, but at the same time, I think would be enormously complex to have governments, namely the federal government, implement. What would be some pragmatic ways forward to move ahead?
Thank you for the question. I'm going to link my answer to lesson number 8, which is the lesson relating to longer-term planning and intergenerational equity. So these two crises have some similarities, but they have important differences. I think COVID-19 has shown that we can respond to immediate crises and marshal the resources necessary to do that. The longer-term crises are where society has more difficulty in dealing with them. So the climate change crisis is both a long-term crisis and now a short-term one, because as we're seeing with the extreme weather, the increased frequency and magnitude of extreme weather. But we do need to address equally short-term crises like COVID-19 and long-term crises. That would mean changing some of the approaches that the government takes to long-term planning. For now, at present, it's quite frequent for governments to focus on short-term deliverables, this year, and in the private sector, this quarter, perhaps. But the future may be discounted in those sorts of decision-making fora. So our decision-making structures, and we've heard about some comment about that in terms of the chair representing future generations in the example Ms. Thorpe provided. We do need to change our decision-making structures so that the long-term future, our children and their grandchildren, are not discounted in present-day decision-making.
No, thank you very much. I think it's something that will continue, that all parliamentarians ought to continue to think about. COVID-19 is a very immediate crisis, as is climate change, but it also has such a large long-term element that there's a tension there that needs to be further considered. I wanted to ask if I could, on recommendation 7, it calls for enhanced collaboration among all actors. How did you put it here? Excuse me. Just give me a moment. Yeah, enhanced collaboration among all actors is needed to find climate solutions. So, again, yes, how could one disagree with that? But on a particular issue is what I'm looking for. Which particular issue would you call for enhanced collaboration on, or issues? Which would be the most immediate areas of focus, or which should be the most immediate areas of focus for collaboration? There's any number of things that, let's focus on governments here because you say all actors, but for our purposes, where can the federal government work with other levels of government? Because I know that's another concern that you have, making sure that there's greater collaboration between the federal and provincial governments. What particular issues? Is it climate adaptation and mitigation? What is it exactly? Helping the transition to green energy? Any ideas on that?
Thank you. I'm going to use this meeting as an example of that enhanced collaboration and involving all actors. Just as this committee has held for decades, held the government to account on financial matters and program implementation, taking this step today shows that this committee is willing to expand its view and look at issues that have been traditionally seen as environment and sustainable development, separate from social and economic. So I'm very pleased that this committee has invited us here today to speak about this issue, because it is a sign that lesson is certainly being learned and being implemented. So I would say on all three of those areas, it's important, because as I mentioned, climate change is not just an environmental issue anymore. It's an economic issue and a social issue, so that all of our structures that typically focused on other matters at the expense of the environment and sustainable development now bring them into account.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I have just a short amount of time remaining, and I know you can't answer it because it's such a complicated question. But many observers have made the point that we won't reach a net zero outcome. We won't live in a net zero world unless there's an embrace of nuclear energy. What is your view on that particular issue?
So those are policy choices for the governments to make in terms of what the mix will be to reach net zero. It's also impossible to know exactly what technologies will advance further between now and 2050. So I can't answer the question as you foresaw in terms of what role it will play. It has a present part of the mix in energy in Canada and other countries. It remains to be seen what percentage of our energy mix will be provided by nuclear between now and 2030, and then between 2030 and 2050 in terms of the next two targets.
Thank you very much. And now for the next 6 minutes, Madame Sinclair Degany. Oh, is she here? Oh, please go ahead. I think you're on mute.
Merci.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. There are two buttons, I think, to mute my sound, and I always forget to turn one of them on and off. Thank you, Madam Chairperson. I'd like to begin by thanking our witnesses for their attendance today, for shedding light on these issues, for their experience and knowledge. I'd also like to stress the fact that this is the first time, I believe, that our Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development is appearing to testify before the committee. Welcome and congratulations. My question is directed at the Commissioner and his team. In recent years, there has been a lot of money given to oil companies, green assistance, quote unquote, which the purpose of which was probably to guide these oil companies from the oil sector towards a fossil fuel-free future. However, in your report, it strikes us that these changes are not occurring and that GHG emissions are not improving whatsoever. So I do have two questions. My first is, when this money is handed over to oil companies, shouldn't we be holding them to account? And if that holding to account process isn't adequate, shouldn't we put an end to subsidising the oil sector across the board? Well, thank you very much, Madam Vice Chair, and it is indeed my first time appearing before this federal parliamentary committee, so I'm glad to be here, and I'd like to thank you for the invitation. Yes, on the issue of subsidies, it's a crucial issue. I'd recommend that you read our other report from November on the Emissions Reduction Fund. We, of course, need accountability measures. We need to determine whether subsidies like those have positive spin-offs in terms of reducing GHG gas emissions. And we need accountability in terms of employment and the other objectives that fall under the fund's mandate. Now, as I've said previously, the government has now given the undertaking to put an end to subsidising fossil fuels, which will reduce gas and oil emissions. So we'll see how things play out in the upcoming years and see whether that indeed does occur, i.e. the phasing out of these subsidies. Question. Here's my follow-up question. Don't you think that the government could go further by ensuring that all financial institutions publish their climate change risks, as the Bank of Canada called for in its most recent report, and in doing so comply with the Task Force for Financial Disclosures requirements? So follow suit vis-à-vis the UK and New Zealand, asking for this data to be released to ensure mid and long-term stability and predictability. Response. This issue is one that interests us indeed, and we're studying it right now. What I can tell you is that the mandate letters instruct the Finance Minister and the Environment and Climate Change Minister to develop mandatory rules and regulations on this particular issue, and also to compel federal institutions and organisations to have a climate risk disclosure policy. So that is occurring. And I'd invite you to look at Canada's Net Zero Emissions Act, Accountability Act. Clause 23 requires the Finance Minister to disclose information on risks and opportunities when it comes to the climate. I don't know when the Finance Minister's first report will be released, however. Thank you very much. Very instructive response you just gave us. Next question. How much time do I have left, Madam Chairperson? Madam Chairperson, you're on mute. How much time do I have left?
How much time do we have left?
A minute.
A minute. Thank you.
Perfect. This question is for Équiterre in that case. 2 years ago, Équiterre published a report, Subsidies of the Federal Government to Fossil Fuels 2020. Fossil fuel subsidies were collated and data was collected at that time. And I quote your report, phasing out fossil fuels is a crucial step to ensuring climate safety and a low emissions climate. It requires major resource undertakings from the government and from other non-government sectors. Mr. Viau, are you surprised that the government is still funding the gas and oil sectors, despite the fact that this is slowing down the fight against climate change? Response. Thank you very much for your question. Surprised? Well, yes. this is a climate crisis, and that's been acknowledged, but I'm not surprised given that it is difficult to change this dynamic of reliance and dependence that we are bogged down in. So it requires an effort on the part of all departments, be it natural resources, the Environment Department, the Finance Department. As the Commissioner mentioned in the report, the Commissioner talks a lot about collaboration within the government, between departments, within provinces and municipalities, and that is still lacking. But there needs to be a political will to cut subsidies to fossil fuels by 2023.
Thank you. We'll now move on to Mr. Desjardins for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses who are present with us today, particularly the Commissioner. Thank you very much and welcome for your very first testimony to the public accounts. So I had an opportunity to look at the report, and I want to be able to ask questions related to 3 portions of it: Lessons 2, Lesson 7, and Lesson 8. But to begin my questioning, I'd like to start with Lesson 2. In this report, it suggests, of course, the high reliance and abundance that Canada has on natural resources. In this interesting kind of irony and problem we have, where we have this tremendous resource and capability, like we do in my home province of Alberta, and through that, we've been able to invest in our economy, invest in our infrastructure. However, to date, including on page 15, you can see the sector employs a huge amount of people still today, 422,000 people in 2019, and particularly important to me, 10,000 Indigenous people. And so my question is, how can the federal government identify and assist communities and workers most affected by that transition to a low carbon economy? So identifying these workers and what kind of assistance will be required to ensure that we can have a good transition to protect workers at the forefront. Mr. Commissioner.
Thank you. I'll focus my answer on the concept of a just transition. So just as this committee focuses quite frequently on financial and other matters, but on the financial matters, we want to see how the numbers add up for the year's budget, and also look at not just the deficit for the year, but the total debt moving forward or accumulated surplus. We need to look at the climate in the same way. Greenhouse gases cannot continue to put us in an environmental debt to not only for the present but for future generations. So we have to have that sort of carbon budgeting approach to greenhouse gases, like we do with monetary issues and fiscal issues. The just transition is critical because we can't just say use a Darwinian approach to a just transition. It wouldn't be a just transition if we left communities behind. And as we pointed out in our report, there are many communities and entire regions of the country that rely on fossil fuel exploration, development, processing, and production, and so on. So there needs to be a viable plan, and I believe the current government is committed to that. We're actually doing an audit of the early days of the just transition for coal workers as a bit of a microcosm for what will need to come on other just transitions in the other fuel bases. So I would say that no one should be left behind. The Government of Canada has a critical role working with the provinces, the territories, municipalities, and Indigenous communities to make sure that no one is left behind as we go along on this important transition. And the transition is important because if we don't do that, we'll have a different transition to a hotter climate, which is also just as difficult or even more difficult to adapt to. So we're going to be transitioning one way or the other. Are we going to do it in a diligent way and have a just transition to a net zero world? Or are we just going to keep muddling through and have a much hotter world that has increasing levels of disaster that we'll have to adapt to?
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Commissioner. And I really want to be able to now discuss how that relates to Lesson 7 in particular, but collaborations among actors to find solutions. I know from my work that there's a tremendous amount of partners across Canada, particularly workers and workers' unions, who want to participate in this plan so that they feel that they're encouraged in the development of Canada's energy future, in encouraged to be participating in Canada's future mix, however, are feeling excluded, not able to be part of this discussion with the government, and feel as though they're today still excluded from these discussions. I work with Indigenous partners for a very long time in my previous life. This is the reality facing them too. How can the government actually ensure that they're hearing the voices of people who are impacted by this most? Because to date, the people I've worked with have not.
Yes, absolutely essential to involve all actors, what we call in our report a whole of society approach. Now, as commissioner, I report on the performance of the federal government, so the focus is there, but the solutions are not entirely there. As you mentioned, the solutions are dispersed across all levels of government, all communities, all peoples, and it's dispersed across the world too, of course, given it's a global issue. So Canada can make inroads in that. One of them, as I used an example already today, having a body like this that is focused on other matters previously, an environment was perhaps set aside to a niche area for others to be concerned about. I'm very, very happy to see this committee expand its ambit of concern to look at climate. And I think that government departments, especially central agencies and the Ministry of Finance, Department of Finance, for example, they need to not only expand their ambit of concern to these important environmental sustainable development issues, but also expand the ambit of input from the communities of which you spoke. So yeah, absolutely crucial. And I would say, especially at the local level for climate adaptation, they're the ones who experience it. They should have a strong say in how we address it.
If I have enough time, Madam Chair, for one quick question related to the participation of youth and, of course, the intergenerational equity piece. What kind of tool would you recommend we could ensure that young people understand this problem and how this generation in particular is disproportionately affecting them? I really enjoyed your framework just mentioning the debt, the idea of debt, this carbon debt. Can you explain or expand on that as a tool for young people?
Well, I'm not sure that young people need to understand it better. It might be our generation that needs to understand it better. My experience with young people is that they're ahead of us on a lot of these issues. So I think we can learn from them. And in the spirit of your previous question, I think they along with local communities and others, are important sources of input, and it's their future at stake. We're supposed to be holding this planet and this country in trust for future generations, but for the last 30 years, we've breached that trust. So I would say that youth have an important role. They themselves are self-organizing, and I wouldn't want to be too prescriptive about how they participate and how they learn about climate change, because I think there's no shortage of initiative on their own part to do that. It's whether our generation will listen to them.
We now have to move on to our second round of questions, and we will have 5 minutes, starting with Mr. Cooper.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm going to direct my questions to Mr. DeMarco. And Mr. DeMarco, more specifically, I have questions arising from page 25 of your report on international climate finance. You note that the government had provided $2.65 billion between 2016 and 2021 to help the developing world fight climate change and develop adaptive infrastructure. Since then, the government has committed a further $5.3 billion over the next 5 years. This amounts to a total of $7.95 billion that Canada has or will be contributing in total to the UN goal of mobilizing $100 billion per year for this purpose. Now, your report included no breakdown of where that money will go or how it will be spent. So do you have a breakdown of where the money, the $2.65 billion, has gone to date?
So thank you for that question. It's an area that interests our office greatly in terms of looking at the relationship between environmental and financial matters, as we've been talking about today. We've highlighted this issue in the report, and it's actually one that we're contemplating conducting a full audit of. And so I can't tell you what value for money they've received from those expenditures to date, but it is something that we're looking at closely, and it may be something that we select as an audit for the coming year, in terms of making sure that Canadians are getting value for money in investments like that similar to how we looked at the emissions reduction fund in November in terms of whether Canadians are getting value for money for these large expenditures that are intended to help with climate change, but are they in fact helping?
Yeah, it is a very sizable amount of money, and just to be clear, you at this point are not in a position to comment on where the dollars have been allocated, what investments have been made, and so on. Is that right?
Yeah, we've done preliminary research and are contemplating doing a full audit of this area, but we have not done one.
Well, thank you for that. Now, we have seen a government that talks a lot, but as you note, they have missed every single target. You made reference to the carbon tax as relatively new. It's been in place for 6 years. I don't know that I would characterize that as relatively new. As your report notes, that Canada is performing the worst of any G7 country relative to its Paris commitments. And since 2005, we have seen a 1.1% reduction in GHGs. Notwithstanding that, the government committed, pursuant to Paris, a 30% reduction, and now the Prime Minister has upped the ante to a 45% reduction. So how possibly can Canadians have any confidence that a government that has presided over an increase, rather a decrease, in GHGs and has blown through every single target can meet that ambitious target, whereby we would have to see emissions reductions 50 times of what has been achieved over the last 14 years of just 1.1%.
Thank you. Yes, it's a crucial issue. Lesson 6 is all about that, and it's nice to have plans and targets, but if you don't act on them, then what are Canadians getting for all of this effort? The story from 1990 to 2019, which is the full range of data that we have, has been about a 20% increase in emissions over that successive governments from the first commitment in the Green Plan to Rio to all the way to the present. So there has been a series of failures followed by failures and other failures. I would say that when the Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act was passed in 2018, it signaled a new approach that I would say is too early to say at the current level of the carbon levy, too early to say what percentage of the reductions will come from that vis-a-vis the other many programs. There's about 64 programs in Canada right now at the federal level. What I am looking forward to see is how the carbon price and the other measures will add up in the new plan that is expected to be tabled next month under the Net Zero Act. We'll have to look at that new plan from Canada to see whether it adds up with the carbon price and all of the other measures to reach the new target that you mentioned, as well as get us on the path to net zero for 2050.
My time, Madam Chair?
Muted. You're muted, Jane.
I am so sorry. Yes, Mr. Cooper, the time is up, and we're moving on to Ms. Bradford for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank our professional witnesses for joining us today and providing their expertise testimony. Following on that previous line of questioning, I'd just like to point out that, I think the report clearly identifies that all governments wear this, and you can't just talk about the present. Many of these, the report also addresses the fact that many of the initiatives that we put in place, they're not instant results that we'll be able to notice right away. It does take time to build on these things. And I feel that, we really have to all work together and engage the public. So that's why my line of questioning was going to look at how we can enhance the transparency and improve the communication with the public in all sectors of society. So public support of initiatives to mitigate the effects of climate change and reach our climate commitments would be greatly improved by enhanced transparency about our progress towards meeting our commitments and our policy measure plans that we plan to put in place in the future. So along that line, I was just wondering if you could, and I'll address this to the Commissioner, perhaps tell us how the federal government could strengthen Canadians' awareness of the climate crisis and the measures to address it. I know that in some parties there's some discrepancy as to whether or not this is in fact a real crisis. I know it's certainly not the government stance, but how can we improve that so that we get the buy-in of all Canadians? Because it's going to take all of us working together to tackle this problem.
Yes, that's an important lesson in our report in terms of the need to continue the job of increasing public awareness of the issue. Certainly, it's much improved from when I first became exposed to this issue in the early 1990s and attending the Rio Convention in 1992, where the UNFCCC was signed. The average Canadian now understands the problems with climate change. Unfortunately, it's taken years of inaction at the Canadian level and the global level to reach the point where we're seeing the tangible effects in terms of extreme weather and more frequent extreme weather. So it's I think the public awareness is getting there. There's more work to be done. I think in terms of accountability and transparency, which was part of your question, Canada needs to do a better job in not only coming up with plans, but disclosing the basis and the assumptions for them and the modeling. That's something that Canada lags behind other countries like the UK on in terms of transparency in the modeling. We've had plans over the years that on paper appear to add up, but in practice don't even come close to adding up in terms of the reductions. So I think we have to be more transparent about the assumptions and also factor in when we go off script and put in programs that actually undermine our climate change efforts, and that has happened as well.
So what are the knowledge gaps and sources of misinformation on the topic, and how can they be best addressed?
Well, as I said, the public's understanding of it is increasing. In our report, we note that Canada isn't necessarily a leader in the public understanding on climate. Other countries have done a better job of that and have a better understanding of it. I think one of the things Canada could do is to make sure that the issue of climate change is looked at as a central priority for the country, and it's not just something that Environment and Climate Change Canada and Natural Resources Canada work on, but it's something that is a whole of government and a whole of society challenge to deal with. It's a difficult question. It's not an easy, a just transition. It's a good name, but it's not an easy thing to do. I mean, there are short-term considerations that need to be dealt with in trying to do something as ambitious as changing the energy mix of the country. So it's a huge challenge, but I think we owe it to future generations and our children and our grandchildren to do what we can rather than to just throw up our hands and say it's too difficult.
I agree completely. The decisions and choices that we make today are definitely going to affect the lives of future generations. So it's extremely important that we involve them as much as possible in the decision-making process. So how can the principle of intergenerational equity be incorporated into institutional decision-making?
A short answer, please.
Yeah, that's what that lesson number 8 is a call to parliamentarians to ask questions like that, and we provided some questions about intergenerational equity. Essentially, we have to expand, as I said before, expand our ambit of concern, get past just short-term expediency, and move towards longer-term planning, looking at generations to come in terms of the effects of present-day decisions.
Thank you. We will now move on to 2.5 minutes with Madame Sinclair Desgagnés. Please go
Merci
ahead.
beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson. You can hear me properly now. I've unmuted my mics or pushed both buttons. My questions are for Mr. Viaud, just to reiterate what we were talking about earlier. You use strong terminology regarding investment in the oil sector. You refer to it as reliance. So if we're going to talk about it as reliance, we need a pretty big solution to address the issue of reliance. So what concrete solutions do you envisage on the part of the government? Response: yes. I didn't mince my words, because it is truly a reliance on fossil fuels that we're experiencing right now. A huge segment of our economy is based on mining fossil fuels. So what can the government do, concretely speaking? As we touched on earlier in this conversation, we talked about the issue of a fair transition. A fair or equitable transition is a starting point that will help us to break this chain of reliance and provide opportunities to communities that rely on the mining of natural resources as their lifeblood. This is the fact of the matter, but we need to put in place a plan with the obligations, as we did with Bill C-12, which became legislation, binding legislation, which the Commissioner referred to earlier. Government obligations as to what they should do with workers and communities. There are plans that are underway. There are election campaign promises. That needs to now materialise. But the top priority is the plan for a fair transition and strong legislation supporting that for communities and workers. Then there's also the issue of subsidies to fossil fuels. We need to phase them out. As the Commissioner stressed, we shouldn't be kicking the can down the street on this issue. We dropped the word inefficiency. If I could just conclude my remarks, Madam Chairperson, because I was mid-sentence, but the final thing we need to do is not replace these subsidies with other subsidies like carbon capture and storage, for example.
Thank you. Mr. Desjardins for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'll be quick. I want to return to the topic with the Commissioner on young people. You know, I'm the critic for youth for my party. I'm also the youngest member of this committee, and I myself have done as much extraordinary work as I can in my own circles to educate my family and my community about what this impact could mean. I was also Alberta's Indigenous Climate Change Chair for a few years back for Uniting Indigenous Governments, and we've seen particularly unique challenges in holding the government accountable. And I want to specifically mention accountability. Young people are organizing across the country. This is truly a crisis that is going to implement not just this generation, but many, many more. You know, I and my children and many people here whose families have children know this kind of fear. So my question is specifically on what we need to do to hold the federal government accountable for the promises they've made. What do young people have to do to hold them accountable? We've done as much as we can. You've noticed, I think, some of the work that young people have done. But now when it comes time to accountability, what can young people do to hold the government accountable?
So beyond waiting till they're allowed to vote, they have quite a few years before that where they can have their voices heard. I've noticed that, you know, as a relatively young person at the 1992 Rio conference, I've seen that it's just been a sea change between then and now, both in terms of the climate getting worse, but also in terms of the voices being heard by much younger people than I was back then as a university student. So it's a positive change to see that movement and mobilization of young people and having their voice heard. And of course, you know, the democratization of information through the internet and so on has facilitated that. But are we just going to allow them to voice their concerns, or are we going to act on it? That's really the question now, and that's why we ended the report on lesson number 8 in terms of intergenerational equity, because we do hold this planet and this country in trust for the future generations, and we need to figure out how to make decisions that further that trust rather than breach that trust. I can't give you specific examples of all the ways of doing that, but it is something that really needs to be done to take seriously our obligation to future generations rather than just using it as a mantra or a buzzword. Mm-hmm. It's been codified in Canadian law already, but it hasn't been operationalized.
Mm-hmm. Just quickly, so on the
I'm
Sorry,
sorry,
thank you, Madam
we're
Chair.
done. And now we move on for 5 minutes. Mr. Bragdon.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Commissioner, and others who have appeared here today. I just want to start off with, Commissioner, a question to you in regards to, do you know how many megatons of carbon have been reduced due to the carbon tax?
So I don't have that number off the top of my head, but I would say that having a carbon levy or pricing carbon is consistent with the principles of cost internalization and polluter pays, which are in Canadian law, and the Supreme Court of Canada has talked about the importance of carbon pricing as one of the important tools for addressing climate change.
Thank you, Commissioner. I only have short time. There's a few questions I want to ask in follow-up. So basically, we don't know yet how many megatons of carbon have been reduced as a result of the carbon tax that have been in some jurisdictions now over a decade here in Canada. So we don't really have a metric. We're not sure if it's been successful, but we do know, however, that the cost of living for Canadians has gone up substantially due to various pressures, inflationary pressures, including that of the carbon tax, and yet we're not sure if it's having any impact on the reduction of carbon in the environment. Then we go that a step further. We also probably can deduct that this is most likely having a far more consequential impact on low-income Canadians living in rural Canada. So it's disproportionately affecting those in rural Canada as well as those who are more likely to be at a lower income level than other Canadians. So really, is there a justification for the carbon tax approach if what we're seeing we can't even measure, and we don't have a report, we don't have a study that says that so far this approach is working? And a follow-up to that is, if we are to put a price on carbon and we're not having impact to this point, by how much more do we have to increase the cost of living on Canadians in order to have an impact that would, in fact, reduce carbon?
So there's a lot there, but I would say to start, we're very interested in the issue, and we're undertaking an audit on carbon pricing. So stay tuned for that report from us later this year. I would not agree with that the proposition that is not having an impact. I answered the question of, do I know the exact number of megatons that the impact has been? That's a different question than has there been any impact. Economic modeling has shown that pricing in previous externalities, such as greenhouse gas emissions, can affect behavior in a positive way if the price is at a level that signals enough to the consumer to change that, or to the producer, and so on. So it is considered to be an efficient means of bringing about behavior modification and therefore reducing emissions if the price is at a level that's high enough to make those changes. So we'll stay tuned for our carbon pricing report on that. And we will have more to say about that later this year.
Well, we look forward to that, because I think that's going to be very important in us being able to move forward and ascertain the effectiveness of that approach. But we also know, and I think it's been established, that there are other jurisdictions that have not implemented carbon tax that as a result have seen even greater reductions in their carbon footprint on a per capita basis while expanding their energy sectors. And I believe that is out there. So perhaps is there not merit to looking at, there may be better approaches that actually achieve better results in reducing carbon without disproportionately affecting the cost of living for average Canadians?
Well, we have to look at cost of living from both sides, right? Because we also have the cost of living with a hotter and hotter planet. And, you've seen the flooding and the heat waves and the wildfires that are also a cost on Canadians in terms of their pocketbook and for some people, their lives. So we have to look at both sides of that equation in terms of the costs of climate change. We have to adapt to not only climate change because we didn't act soon enough, but we also have to adapt to the measures we're putting in place to address it, such as carbon pricing and not leaving, for example, people behind that you mentioned, people in rural areas or Indigenous communities and so on that might be disproportionately affected by high heating costs or something like that. The federal government needs to look at a way to move that transition forward without leaving people behind and causing them to disproportionately pay for the common good of addressing the climate crisis.
Madam Chair, do I have any time, or is that?
No, that is
Okay,
it.
thank you.
Thank you for asking. Now we move on to Mr. Dong for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. First of all, I do want to welcome all the witnesses for coming today. My first question goes to the Commissioner. What percentage of Canada's GHG reduction can be attributed to federal measures as opposed to things that other levels of government has done? Let's put a timer on this, let's say in the last 10 years.
So I don't have that number off the top of my head, but over the last 10 years, there's been essentially a flatlining of emissions. There hasn't been a substantial reduction. So that's a problem in itself. Our curve had gone up over the last 30 years instead of down. The federal government is the one that signs international agreements like the Rio Convention or the Paris Agreement. So it has an obligation to take the lead on them, but it can't do everything. There's under our constitutional division of powers, the federal government can do certain things and the provinces and other
that's
levels of government.
exactly I think that's exactly one of the biggest challenge right now, because I represent a riding in Ontario. In 2009, the Ontario government then introduced Green Energy Act, replacing 25% of its energy fleet from coal generation to renewable energy. And then I think in 2016, Ontario government chose the cap and trade system as opposed to, carbon tax. And I just want to point out that the federal government at the time gave the option to the province, say, you have a choice of the methods to reduce carbon emission. So in your view, and I'm sure you talk to other levels, like other provincial commissioners and so on and so forth, what can the federal government do to ensure consistency at other levels of government? So when a policy is introduced, for example, in Ontario right now, they've canceled the cap and trade system, right? So because to me, the time is ticking. And if we cannot move as a society constantly towards one direction and taking steps back, it's counterproductive and it's not responsible to taxpayers. So in your view, what can the federal government do to ensure that these type of consistency in policy can happen with other levels of government, of course?
Yeah. So cooperation is ideal, but it's not always possible if there's a divergence of interests. You mentioned other having and done an audit of Ontario's plan, which we concluded was not based on sound evidence, the current, or at least the 2019 plan that we looked at. You can see the problems if you rely entirely on cooperation with another actor whose plan doesn't add up. So I would say that what you need to have is minimum standards at the federal level that will make sure that you achieve the outcome, but allow for provinces and territories to displace that mechanism if they have equivalent effective mechanisms. So that's possible under carbon pricing. It's possible under methane regulations and other areas like species at risk and so on, where the provinces can act. But if they don't, the feds should come in and make sure that it's not just, oh well, we hope they had done something on this, but they didn't. The federal government, as the one who's committed to these Paris Agreement and other agreements, needs to have that backstop to say that if there's not a sufficient action at the local or regional or provincial levels or territorial levels, then our system will apply. That's true for a couple of areas like carbon pricing and methane regulations, but not others.
And would you say for the general public, do they understand the importance of this collaboration between provincial and federal government?
Well, I think the general public, looks to its governments as the expression of their collective will as to what they want the governments to do. They don't have a lot of patience for not my department answers or not my level of jurisdiction answers. They would really want their collective representatives at all levels to get together and work together. And that's that whole of society comment that we make in our report, that we need everyone working together. Federal government, though, with these global crises of climate change and biodiversity, they definitely need to take the lead. There's no doubt about that.
Thank you. And I want to ask Ms. Sorpo a quick question. what role do you see the private sectors can play in this grand, picture of carbon reduction?
Donc, le secteur.
Well, the private sector has a huge role to play because it is comprised of employees and individuals. There are many measures that can be taken in terms of businesses' strategies and objectives to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by way of a number of government mechanisms. Even, for example, public contracts, government contracts, can include in them accountability criteria when it comes to climate change objectives. So businesses and companies need to do their fair share, whether it be to do with their operations and, as mentioned earlier, in terms of awareness building of their staff and employees. The conversation needs to change on climate change. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to the third round for 5 minutes each, Mr. Lawrence.
Thank you very much, and once again, the chair is doing a fabulous job. I'll be splitting my time, and Madam Clerk, if you wouldn't mind just tapping me about 2 minutes or so with Mr. Morris. And so I just want to get to the reality is that if economics didn't matter at all, we could get to net zero tomorrow. We could just shut down all our industries. And so it is a weighing of balances. But I don't see anything in this report as to the impact. If we were to, so I'll ask you a straightforward question. I'm hoping a numeric, empirical answer. If we wanted to get to net zero by 2025, what would be the economic impact? What loss in our GDP would we have to have?
So to get to net zero by 2025, that would be quite ambitious. I would say that that's probably impossible to do without serious disruption. That's only 3 years from now, and we're at 700 and something megatons of emissions in 2019. To get down to zero in 3 years, I think 2050 seems a long way off, but 2025 is probably too soon. So
when you say disruption, just to be clear, what would that would mean a significant significant downturn in our economy. We would impoverish millions, would we not?
To go to net zero within 3 years? I haven't seen any modeling about that, but I would just say that I don't think anyone is seriously thinking that we can bring about a just transition that rapidly in a country like Canada.
Is there a report, or will there be a report showing the economic impact of overly, if we were to reduce net zero to 2025 to 2030, are we going to see any side of the other equation? For example, there are millions of oil and gas, thousands of oil and gas workers who are dependent on oil and gas for their very livelihood. Are we going to have any comment about that, or we just look at one side of the equation?
Oh no, we need to look at the whole part of the equation. I'm just saying that 2025 is too soon of a target to look at. I don't think it's really feasible to do that quick of a transition to zero when we're at 700 right now.
Thank you very much. I'm sure we'll have the exact same line of questioning from the member of the Green Party.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence, particularly given the difference in our line of questioning for your collaborative approach. I want to point out again that in the report, the Commissioner points out the majority of Canadians want more ambitious climate action. And so I think I really appreciate that the folks from Équiterre were at COP26 this past year. And so I want to direct my questions towards them. Specifically, it's about this, what's the point in learning a lesson if you're not going to apply it? We're not going to have another 20-year, if we have this kind of failure after failure 20 years from now, the question about survival of our species is at hand. And so constructively, we have the current governing party talking about this tax credit, which is another fossil fuel subsidy as called out by 400 academics across the country for carbon capture. And so I wonder if Ms. Thorpe or Mr. Veal would like to comment on the importance of applying this lesson that has been called out here with respect to the incoherence of investing in fossil fuel subsidies and buying a pipeline with respect to then trying to take action on climate at the pace that science requires us to.
Je vais commencer.
Well, I'll take a stab at that first, and I'll let my colleague finish up. There's a lot of components to your question, sir. Earlier, we were talking about how efficient the target carbon tax was, and I'd like to remind everyone that all parties, in some form or another, had proposed some kind of a carbon tax at some point. So I think it's here to stay. But when it comes to carbon capture, we talked about the efficiency of a carbon tax, but what's the efficiency of a carbon capture? We're talking about 0.1% of emissions that you referred to. You referred to the letter from the experts, 0.4% of emissions. And that's not counting the fact that emissions are on their way up. So this will have no concrete reduction. The committee is asking some good questions, and the committee is addressing the appropriate issues. Earlier, we talked about the issue of the fair or just transition. Jobs is crucial. 70,000 direct jobs are linked to this industry. So we need to think in those terms if we want to really make cuts and reductions. It's inevitable. Earlier, we referred to the cost of living. Climate change's effect on cost of living is much bigger than that of any carbon tax. Let's be honest. The cost in terms of agriculture is huge when it comes to droughts and floods. We have to address that. Otherwise, we have a huge problem.
Ms. Thorpe?
Well, if I could just add to that by saying that when it comes to carbon capture and storage, I'd remind you that natural infrastructures are the most efficient and effective way of capturing carbon. And so the whole idea of maintaining forests and natural infrastructures, the various environments, that is the most effective and efficient way for Canada to effectively and significantly reduce its emissions, rather than in other techniques.
If we were to use those same funds to invest in the job security and retraining of workers, the impact that could have.
Un impact.
Well, that's what we have to do. Obviously, it will have an impact on the climate if we take the resources, have a well thought out transition, one that's regulated such that no community is left by the wayside. That's what the priority is. We need to transition to renewable energies. Now, that doesn't mean completely leaving these communities by the wayside. It means actually looking after them. And we'll see that there are investors that are more and more reluctant, and there's a movement that we won't be able to continue with at some point.
To each of the witnesses for your testimony, and again to my colleagues for the chance to be a part of this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we move on to Ms. Shanahan for 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I'd like to thank the witnesses who are here together with us today. And I'd like to thank my colleagues who are just so fully engaged in this study. It's really important, and it really is gratifying to see that all of the political parties around the table are engaged in working together in order to move forward with a fair transition and to combat climate change. My first question is directed at the Commissioner. This is a first, this historic report, isn't it, on the fight against climate change? What motivated you to undertake this analysis? What was the idea behind it?
Merci.
Well, thank you for the question. It was a report that was a little bit different to previous reports. There's a summary of all of our audits since 19 88 through to 2022. And our overarching objective was to look back in history, and perhaps we need to learn from Lesson 8 more poignantly. And perhaps we need to look at these performance audits in a longitudinal manner over the past 100 years, when Canada, as one of the leaders, started its fight against climate change, to where we are now, where we're no longer a leader in terms of actions and results on the world stage. So we can learn historically, as well as by looking at short periods of time. For example, from Lesson 8, what can we do after 30 years? Not just in 3 years' time with X plan or X, Y, or Z target. We need to take all of that into consideration. Excellent. Well, this is within the purview of this committee, so audits are still important to us. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing those audits. In your opinion, Commissioner, and from a governance and accountability standpoint, because that's the whole thrust of this, isn't it? What are the major obstacles currently to coordinating this work that is so important out on the ground in order to meet our targets? Response. Well, there are a lot of obstacles in our way. There's the system of departments which are in silos, unfortunately. A lot of governments, not just the federal government, tends to work in silos. Various departments and agencies have their individual mandates, and yet the challenges are horizontal and are cross-cutting and affect all departments and agencies. So we really need to rethink this vertical system that we're entrenched in and bogged down in, and think about taking action in a horizontal manner. So that's the first thing. Secondly, between the various governments, provinces and territories and Indigenous communities, municipalities, we need greater collaboration, cross-cutting efforts to ensure that we have solid outcomes, not just good plans, not just good targets. Over the past 30 years, we've had a lot of good plans, a lot of good targets. This has been studied in depth, and yet the results aren't there in Canada. And that's different from other G7 countries. Since the 1990s, our emissions have actually gone up to the tune of 20%, whereas other G7 countries are at status quo, or they've in fact reduced their greenhouse gas emissions up to 20, 30, even 40%. So Canada hasn't stepped up to the plate as a partner in among G7 countries. Question. So we have our work cut out for us.
Thank you. And now we will move on to Madame Sinclair Desgagnés.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Today we've heard a lot about the economic impacts of disinvesting in the oil sector in the West, i.e. businesses and corporations that rely on subsidies. So I'd like to hear what your opinion is on the possibility of the outcome of inaction. What will be the economic impacts of inaction? How much has it cost to date? And how much will it cost in the next couple of years if we don't act swiftly and effectively? Thank you for your question. The cost of inertia, the cost of inaction. Well, that's probably more costly than the cost of actually taking action. Ms. DaCosta in our office read an organizational report which has taken a quantitative look at the cost of inaction. So I'd like to hand the floor to Ms. DaCosta, who might offer up a couple of examples in terms of the cost to healthcare, the cost in terms of infrastructure. Ms. DaCosta.
Oui, bonjour.
Yes. Can you hear me now? Yes, you can. Good. Yes, hello. So we looked at the cost of inaction, especially in the Climate Choices Organization report. They conducted reports on healthcare infrastructure, among other things. Now, if you just look at the data on the floods in the West, it cost over $400 million in terms of what insurance companies had to pay out. I know that there are a number of insurance companies that are starting to cost out exactly how much it costs when there's a natural disaster or the cost of inaction to in this realm. Well, thank you very much. If I could just sum up what you just said, experts are saying that the cost of inaction is far more costly than the cost of taking action. And the takeaway from that is that, unfortunately, over recent years, regardless of which government which has been in office, we are suffering the consequences today, and it's very unfortunate. And that brings to an end my remarks for today. Thank you.
Thank you. And we will now move on to Mr. Desjardins for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to thank the witnesses again and focus particularly on one aspect of the report related to kind of the overall theme of it, which is lessons learned. And you've taken a really excellent review of the last few decades and be able to summarize for us parliamentarians really the direct result of inaction. You know, these are really scary and dire results that you folks are presenting today. And I want to be able to give Canadians, especially across the country, the clear answer to what this report means for Canadians moving forward. And so just to quote a portion of it, Canada's 2021 National Inventory Report emissions were 730 megatons of carbon dioxide equivalent in 2019, while its target for that same, or for the following year of 2020 was 607 megatons. So it's a true fact that Canada's emissions have actually increased and continue to increase. And so this is a real fact that Canadians have to understand for your purposes of public education. So will you comment on the reality and fact that the government, whether it's current or in previous, has truly failed to hit our greenhouse gas emission targets? And could you describe what that could mean for Canadians?
Thank you. Yeah, that's the point of having the graph on the cover of our report, to remind people that not only is the emissions curve disturbingly increasing, it's increased substantially since we started work on this 3 decades ago. And that differs from the other G7 nations, 2 of which have stabilized their emissions and the others have actually decreased them substantially. So Canada has not walked the talk in terms of climate action. And this is despite having been essentially a leader in the field in the late 1980s with convening the first major conference on this issue in 1988, and then the Green Plan, and then the leadership role at Rio. So Canada has to turn its good intentions into actions. We don't want another destination to be paved with good intentions, another hot destination to be paved with good intentions, as the saying may go. This is something that is a huge challenge, and it's really, as I've said before, something that obliges us to act in a way that preserves our environment and our quality of life for future generations. Because today,
Mr. Commissioner, so just to be frank, the current federal program will not hit our targets, correct?
No, we don't have a plan that meets our targets right now, but we are expecting, because the old plan is for the old target, and it was going to exceed the old target by a few percentages, but the old target has been displaced by 40 to 45%. So the new plan that's coming out next month should add up. It's not us to put it together. It's up to the federal government to put it together, but they have their 40 to 45% target for 2030, and they have an obligation by law to put out that plan by the end of March.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner, and for the members for your hard work on this. It means a lot to me and for Canadians.
Thank you. And now we move on for 5 minutes to Mr. Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll direct my questions to Mr. DeMarco, following up on where I had left off with respect to this government's record and their target of 45% in just 9 years from now, or 8 years from now. We saw a 1.1% reduction between 2005 to 2019 on the back of a paper napkin at the Biden Climate Summit farce. The Prime Minister came up with a new number of 45%, even though, of course, the government is so far off from meeting their Paris commitments, the worst in the G7 of any country. So I would just ask you, Commissioner, do you believe that there is any possibility that the government could realistically meet a 45% reduction when they are, to date, so far off the mark?
If the best predictor of future performance is past performance, then I would be a pessimist and I'd say it's not going to happen. But you see on the last page of our report that we strike an optimistic tone because of certain changes, including the carbon levy, the codification of net zero into law, the requirement for new plans. There's reason to be optimistic. There's reason to be optimistic for other reasons too, in terms of society's understanding of the problem and the global momentum. So it is possible to meet it. It's a question of will. Will the government do what it takes to actually come up with a plan next month, and then, most importantly, implement that plan to achieve the target in 2030 and then eventually 2050?
You know, with the greatest of respect, Mr. DeMarco, we would have to move at 50 times faster than we have to date. And this is after the implementation of a carbon tax. It's after phasing out largely coal-generated, fire-generated power throughout the country, which is low-hanging fruit, so to speak. So, I mean, again, 45%. I thought your report optimistically spoke of 36%, and that really sounds optimistic.
Well, the 36% is the federal government's current projection of what their old plan would achieve. They're going to have a new plan next month. So it is possible. I mean, as some of the witnesses...
Sorry to interrupt. You said it's possible at what cost?
So that's what I was going to get to, which is it'll be a big cost for both alternatives. One is adapting to a net zero future and changing our economy to make sure that happens. That will come at a cost, but the cost of inaction. So there is no null alternative left, right? Where we can't just say, oh, we're going to continue with the status quo because our carbon budget will be broken, right? We'll break the bank in terms of our GHG emissions and how much will be in the upper atmosphere heating the planet, which will just have a different type of cost for us in the form of flooding and premature deaths from heat waves and so on. So we're unfortunately, because of 30 years of inaction globally and in Canada, we're at this, two unattractive options of a major restructuring to reach net zero, or if we don't do that, a more catastrophic level of climate change with mass migrations and extinctions and so on.
But do you have any metric, any number you can point to in terms of the economic impact of going from a 1.1% reduction to a 45% reduction in the span of 8 years?
We're going to look at, under our new obligation under the Net Zero Act, as soon as that new plan comes out next month, then we are going to start diving into it. Are these realistic at a cost per ton basis?
So how can you say, Commissioner, that it's possible if you can't even provide any metric with respect to the economic impact?
Well, I can say that it's possible to do it. I mean, I haven't said what the cost would be. It's certainly technically possible to do it.
I guess if we shut down everything in Canada, we might be able to do it. But I mean, is that realistic?
That's not realistic. It's going to be a transition between now and 2030, but it's not realistic to keep having the planet heat up and then just deal with other types of costs like flooding.
No, Commissioner,
and
that's nice. That's nice. That may be the case, that it's not good to see that, but my question was specifically about achieving a 45% reduction, and you provided nothing to back up the assertion that it's
Point of
might
order,
be
Chair.
possible.
Well,
Okay.
the obligation in the act is for the federal government to
Point of
come
order.
up with a
We have
plan,
a
and then
point
we'll
of
audit
order.
it. That's what's going to happen.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's, we're all very appreciative for the witness to come and give their thoughts. And my point of order is that if a member is asking a question, I think it's fair for the witness to use maybe not exactly to the seconds, but same amount of time to provide the answer. And I think that's beneficial to all members of this committee. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think it was largely the case, but I take your point, Mr. Dongan.
Okay, please go ahead, Commissioner.
Well, I think I've made my point, which is that the costs of action are significant. The costs of inaction are also significant. Unfortunately, because of decades of inaction, we don't have this status quo null alternative that we can continue on with. It just isn't going to work.
Thank you. And we move on to Mr. Dong for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I just want to share some of my thoughts on this issue. Colleagues, we all understand that this is about human survival. It's about the survival of our kids and their kids. So I think the conversation about, whether climate change is real, whether or not we need to transition away from fossil fuel, that conversation is done. The train has left the station because all major countries on this planet, their government, their leaders recognize that that's why we have all these agreements, right? So international agreements. So I think the conversation for us to have, opposition parties, governing parties, is how do we transition to a cleaner energy or cleaner future, actually, most efficiently and most as quickly as possible. I think that's the conversation we're having. So with that, and I just want to turn to the commissioner. I have a lot of friends from Alberta, and they're telling me that the support for renewable energy storage has been pretty vibrant, and there's a lot of conversation about that. Can you share? And I'm sure that you talk to, your colleagues, international colleagues. Can you share with the committee, what do you observe in Canada from other different provinces, their general attitude towards renewable energy? And secondly, what do you hear from other countries? What are they doing? Obviously, they're doing better than we are, according to the report. What are they doing we're not? That we should, I know you're not into policy suggestions or whatnot, but can you share with us some of the things that they're doing we're not, and probably can help us in the future? Thank you.
So I guess the biggest difference between other countries and ours is commitments being followed up by action. That would be the biggest difference in terms of what we're seeing elsewhere. Canada there's been no shortage of commitments, but unfortunately a disappointing set of actions in terms of the climate change record. I'd like to bring this back to the nonpartisan nature of this committee and the depolarization point that we make in our report. You're absolutely right. We do need to work together. The interests being expressed by the various members today are not unimportant. We do need to figure out how this transition will work so that people aren't left behind in some sort of Darwinian transition where communities or regions are left holding the bag while others transition to a net zero future. We have to be in this together and recognize that I think all of our interests in terms of quality of life, a healthy environment, and a quality of life for our future generations, everybody in this meeting, I believe, shares those interests. It's just a question about how to do it. And that's why we focus on depolarizing the debate about whether we should do something and focus on what are the best tools to accomplish the government's commitments to a net zero future and significant reductions by 2030.
Thank you. Chair, I'll give the rest of the time to Peter, my colleague. Thank you.
Thank you to Mr. Dong. Question for Equiterre. In the opening remarks, the point was made that, or the suggestion was made that there ought to be a massive training of public servants on the issue of climate change and specifically global warming. I take your point. That's a huge undertaking, though. How should that proceed? Number one, and number two, are there other countries, other democracies that have carried this out?
Oui, donc, merci pour...
Thank you very much for the question, sir. Obviously, all of the questioning today demonstrates how imperative it is to change the narrative on climate change and to face the fact that this is an existential urgency and threat. The Commissioner's report speaks to that imminent threat. Now, in previous years, the government has set out orientations in terms of training. For example, the rights of Indigenous persons and the need to combat and eradicate systemic racism across the government, and how important it is for the government to provide training to public servants who follow modules. This is nothing new. In fact, under the Conservative Harper government, there were training courses on, for example, occupational health and safety. So the mechanisms are already there. And there are external stakeholders that are there to put together factual and useful training courses which will help to depolarize the debate so we end up with something more constructive. Now, as to your question, what other bodies have done this? I have started my research on this. There are bodies in France and Germany that are doing it, but we need to do more, obviously.
Thank you very much. I don't think I have much time, but look forward to thoughts in future meetings maybe on how those countries have done and what Canada can learn. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we are on our fourth round. We are on a roll, though, and it is for 5 minutes. Please go ahead, Mr. Bragdon.
I will yield my time to Mr. Lawrence.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Bragdon. Really appreciate that. Want to, of course, my riding of Northumberland, Peterborough South is close to several nuclear energy facilities, of which create many great jobs. And I'm also of the view that nuclear has to be a critical part to our future. I'm wondering if the Commissioner could see if there's any way of achieving the target without at least continued, if not greater, reliance on nuclear power going forward.
So thank you for the question. So nuclear is part of the mix in several of the jurisdictions around the world, including provinces such as yours, as Ontario, which has a large amount of generation from nuclear as well as hydro and renewable. It took a lead in phasing out coal, and that was one of the major, in response to an earlier question, that was one of the major provincial initiatives to address that had the effect of addressing greenhouse gas emissions. So I can't tell you, I'm not a policy making commissioner or a policy advisor commissioner. The role is to look at whether commitments are being
No. But excuse me, I'm sorry, but my time is short there. But you are supposed to hold the government to account, and just like if I was looking at a financial statement, if I said there weren't bonds or there weren't stocks in a certain portfolio, we wouldn't be able to make our investment target. I think this is more than a reasonable question, and one, quite frankly, you should be prepared to answer. And I'm a little disappointed that you appear not to be, because
point of order.
I'm happy to
Chair,
answer.
I'm sorry. Again, I think we have a respectful atmosphere here in this committee, and badgering the witness is not congenial to that. I think that Mr. Lawrence should apologize to the witness.
Thank you. I'm prepared to elaborate a little bit on that because I don't know if I fully answered his question. So, Madam Chair, may I proceed?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I think we touched on this a little earlier in the first hour. So the current mix, especially in Ontario and some other jurisdictions around the world, nuclear is a major part of a low emissions grid. And I foresee that continuing, at least in the short term, why I say I can't foresee the future for the next 20 all the way to 2050, and whether there will be other technological
Thank you, sir. I don't mean to interrupt, but my time is short. But in the absence of a great new technological development, we have three primary sources. One is we have renewables, which everyone here I'm sure would like to see more of, which include solar and wind. Unfortunately, they're intermittent technology. And then we have fossil fuels, and then we have nuclear. There is no, right now, correct me if I'm wrong, but if we want to reduce fossil fuel generated energy, we need at least the same amount, if not more, nuclear, because, like I said, renewables are intermittent technologies, and we currently don't have the batteries to store their intermittent power. So we need nuclear, and we need more nuclear.
So is that a question, or you just?
Yeah, I want you to agree with me.
Sorry, I can't agree with you on that. The policy choices are for the government, but it does have to add up. I'll agree with you on that the numbers do have to add up. And it is frustrating for Canadians to see 30 years where the numbers and the plans have not added up in terms of results. The recipe going forward will surely change as technology improves. And as you mentioned, storage, energy storage, whether it's through batteries or reservoirs and so on, is crucial. And conservation is too. We haven't talked much about that, but we also have to become much more efficient at the way we use energy, of course.
Do we have any time left, Ms. Chair? I have more questions. We do? Okay. I'm seeing yes, you're on mute. But so the other question I had is,
yes.
Sorry? I'm good. So with respect to resilience, I think that this is an area where we need greater investment. As we've seen with China's recent announcement that they will not be investing in coal reduction. In fact, they said that it should be the developed nations, I believe were the exact words, that are making these investments. So with that being said, and they're being one of the primary polluters, or if you will, we will. I don't see how we hit our targets, our global targets, without China's help. And so we need to brace for impact. Is that not fair?
Because Canada and the globe didn't act proactively enough on this when they had the chance several decades ago, we have to now work equally on mitigation.
Excuse me, sir, but I just like that's factually incorrect, right? Like Canada is 3% of GHG emissions. If Canada had gone down to if less 2.6, I'm told. If we'd gone down to zero, the globe we would still be on the same trajectory we are in accordance with your views. Well, you tell me how much will the world be increasing in temperature, and what will be the impacts if we don't reduce it? Because Canada's 3% won't make the difference.
So we're a globe with around 200 countries, and each one, this is the tragedy of the commons issue, right? Each one can't solve this issue on its own, and all of the smaller nations by population can't just say, well, we're small, so we don't have to do anything. That's not an equitable approach to dealing with an international problem.
Just to be clear, sir, I wasn't saying that.
Thank you. That's the end of the answer there. And we're moving on to Ms. Bradford for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. And I once again want to thank our witnesses for coming today. I know it's been a long couple of hours, especially for you, Mr. DeMarco. So I want to thank you. And I just have maybe a final question to kind of just wrap up. So I want to thank you for coming and speaking to this very important report about lessons learned. I think it's very clear that all of us, all countries in the world, all of us individually as people and citizens of the world, and all industries and sectors are going to have to do their part if we're going to be successful in mitigating the damage of climate change. We have a lot of catching up to do, and we need to get on with it. So I was wondering, Mr. DeMarco, if you could indicate, of these 8 lessons learned, which are going to be the easier to implement, and which of them will be the most challenging, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you.
Okay, I'll use examples rather than go through all 8 because of the time, but increased collaboration, especially within the federal government, and not having, say, for example, Environment and Climate Change Canada pushing on one side of the rock and Natural Resources Canada pushing on the other side of the rock, which has happened in the past, in terms of the objective of pushing the rock uphill, into the analogy that I'm using. So that's low-hanging fruit in one sense of the government getting its act in order and looking at way in a horizontal or centralized manner. Lesson number 8 is difficult. We have a lot of structures in society, government and non-government, that discount the future, as I mentioned, and it'll be hard to have people think about, long-term implications and not just think about them but act on them. So that's a challenge, but I don't see our way out of this without really addressing that challenge. And I'm really pleased to say, you mentioned this is a long 2 hours. I'm very pleased to have a nonpartisan committee engaging on these issues. I'm happy to stay here the rest of the day if you want me to. It's good to see this.
Done. I'm enjoying it as well. Sorry, I know it's out of order.
Thank you. Yeah. So I'm really happy that you're having these conversations, and no one is denying climate change in this conversation. We have depolarized it to a certain extent, and there's legitimate questions about the effects of short-term adaptation to a net zero future, and legitimate effects about what happens if we don't. And I'm just happy that you're having these conversations at this committee.
Very much. So that was my final question, but I believe Han has perhaps another question.
Sure. I do actually. I have lots of questions, and Commissioner, thank you so much. I think we're learning a lot. You mentioned that in the road to transition, we can address some of the social and economic problems as well. I believe in Ontario, shortly after the introduction of Green Energy Act, they created an industry of renewable energy. And at the time, it was sort of one of the leader or destination for foreign investment. So we saw a lot of job being created. What's your observation, or from a commissioner's view, would you say that was a sort of a successful, good example for other jurisdictions or other province to kind of take a look and learn from it? Or would you say it's too late, we kind of lost the competitive edge comparing to other jurisdictions in the world in terms of attracting investment and create jobs in that transition?
Yeah, so you're touching on one area that we haven't talked about today, and that is the opportunities of action. So we've talked about the costs of inaction and the costs of action, but there's also the opportunities of action. So a renewable future requires, significant investments in the private sector, and they have the opportunity to profit from that too, as well as the related jobs that will be in those sectors. So the whole coalescing conversation around the opportunities that adapting to a net zero future present. That's something we haven't talked about much today, but under the new legislation, the Minister of Finance is supposed to talk about not just the risks, but the opportunities associated with climate change under Section 23 of the new legislation. So yes, it's an important area, and we do need to talk more about those opportunities.
Do you think that benefit will trickle down to the different provinces?
It has to under the just transition approach. It has to. We shouldn't be, as I said before, writing off certain provinces that might have, profited from fossil fuels in the past. They have to be able to profit from the green transition as well, and that's the just transition concept.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'd like to thank all the witnesses that's come today, and it has been a very interesting and engaging meeting. Thank you very much. Before we adjourn, will the committee be willing to meet for 30 minutes in camera on Thursday? As this is not an audit, the analyst's report will be drafted differently, and they want to ask recommendations from the committee. We can put it on notice for Thursday. Are we in agreement?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Angela, I'm sorry, I cannot see the in-person.
We are in agreement here. I'm not sure about Peter. He might be on the other side, but we're in.
Yeah, no, we're good.
Okay, that's great. Well, thank you very much, everybody, and have a great day. We are now adjourned.
Merci tout le monde.
Thank you, everyone.